Hi, I'm Keon, a senior research analyst with Thomson Reuters Lipper, and I'm here to speak to you about the fund flows activity for the week ended Wednesday, May 17th. Let's start by taking a quick look at that week's market activity. Well, the markets tanked on the 17th as the New York Times ran a story that President Trump tried to influence FBI Director Comey into dropping the investigation against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The street took this as a negative sign, as once again this is another obstacle in the way of President Trump implementing his pro-business agenda. And as months move along, the street is starting to wonder if this is ever going to happen, as this investigation will now most likely drag out even longer. All right, that's enough for the market news. Let's turn our activity back now to the fund flows, what happened during the week. Let's start by taking a look at our fund macro groups. Equity mutual funds took in equity mutual funds had outflows of $1.8 billion last week. Taxable bond funds took in $1.3 billion in net new money. Muni bond funds had net inflows of $329 million, and money market funds grew their coffers by $4.1 billion. We'll take a closer look at each group now, starting with our equity funds. The equity mutual funds, as we said, the $1.8 billion in outflows was their 8th straight weekly outflow. Once again, domestic equity funds were responsible for the bulk of the weekly outflows. They had outflows of $1.8 billion, while non-domestic equity funds had outflows of only $12 million. Let's turn our attention now to equity ETFs. This group had inflows last week, almost $600 million. It was their 6th straight weekly inflow. But also similar to what we saw in equity mutual funds, the money was going into the non-U.S. products and out of the U.S. products. The largest inflows for the week were the iShares MSCI EFA, which had about $1.5 billion in net new money come in. The iShares Core MSCI Emerging Market ETF took in about $870 million, while the SPDR S&P 500 saw just over $2 billion leave their coffers. The next macro groups to take a look at are the taxable bond fund groups. We'll start by taking a look at the mutual funds. This group, net inflows again last week. The net inflows over $1 billion represents its 5th straight weekly inflow. The main contributors to this week's positive numbers were core plus bond funds, as well as short investment grade debt funds. The groups had inflows of $525 million and $391 million respectively. Let's move on now to the taxable bond ETFs. This group also saw net inflows last week. Roughly $3.1 billion in net new money came into their coffers. The major contributors there were the iShares iBoxx investment grade corporate product, the iShares JP Morgan US dollar emerging market bond product, and the iShares iBoxx high yield corporate product, which had net inflows of over $700 million, $458 million and $350 million respectively. As the table illustrates, the outflows from the individual ETF side were much more muted than we saw for the inflows. Let's move on now, look at our municipal bond fund category. Net inflows for this group again last week. They took in $329 million in net new money. It was also their 6th straight weekly inflow. During this time, they've taken in roughly $3 billion in net new money. This group has actually benefited from the delay in the implementation of Trump's agenda. They would have been severely hurt by the tax reform that Trump is trying to put through, as the lower top marginal tax rate will hurt the muni bond fund group, will not make the investment quite as attractive to investors. In this week's activity, the major contributor to the inflows was the high yield muni debt fund group. They had just over $200 million in net new money come in. The last group to take a look at is money market funds. Big inflows here this week, $4.1 billion overall, with the main contributor being the institutional U.S. Treasury money market funds, as they had $4.5 billion in net inflows for the week. That wraps up this week's report. Please join us here. If you'd like to take a closer look at the data, please join us at our website, which is www.lipperusfundflows.com. And please join us here again next week, where another one of our analysts will discuss that week's fund flows activity.